Hi there, Chris from Stone Age Gamer here, and welcome back to the gratuitous Rainbow Spectrum. It would be fair to say that the Nintendo Switch has been a bit of a hit, but Nintendo's history is very long. So what we're here to do is run through their extremely extensive list of intellectual properties and give them all a health rating. See how they're doing, so to speak. Since Nintendo's list of IP is so very long, we're breaking it down on a letter-by-letter basis, starting naturally with A. We've also thrown numbers in here for good measure. So let's see how things are going for the big N in the Nintendo Report.
First up, we have 1-2 Switch. Honestly, I cannot believe that this is an IP that exists, let alone one worth mentioning in a setting like this. I cannot believe that Nintendo made this game in the first place and that it performed well enough to become a thing. But here we are. In case you've never had the pleasure, 1-2 Switch is an incredibly stupid party game where folks take control of Joy-Cons and or cell phones and play absurd minigames. But the thing is, it's actually incredibly clever, which is something I take no pleasure in saying. I want to hate this dumb game with all my might, but darn if it isn't fun. So what's its health rating? I'm going to say great. This game just got a sequel in 2023 called Everybody 1-2 Switch, which is so much fun and so borderline offensively stupid that it makes my head spin. Its host character, Horace, is an abomination, but the minigames are an absolute blast. This seems like an incredibly low-effort project for Nintendo, so I expect to see it continue on whatever their next platform winds up being. Next, let's talk 1080. Extreme sports are awesome, especially in video game form. Back in the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation era, they really reached peak popularity, and thus, snowboarding games started coming out of the woodwork. Nintendo's own 1080 snowboarding for Nintendo 64 is commonly looked back on as one of the best out there, and remains a classic to this day. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to give this one a health rating of not so good. In 2003, Nintendo released 1080 Avalanche for GameCube, and it was pretty darn cool. But that was the last new game to bear the 1080 license, which is a shame because it's not like snowboarding games just stopped being fun. The original game just released on Nintendo Switch Online recently, and references to the game can be found in the most recent Smash Bros. Games, so it isn't completely dead, but the series could certainly be healthier. Moving on to the letter A proper, we have Advance Wars. The Wars series has been around in Japan since the Famicom days, but its iconic Advance Wars entry that released in the US on the Game Boy Advance helped catapult the franchise into the mainstream, which is why it's falling under the letter A here. Regardless of alphabetization, Advance Wars fared really well, inspiring numerous sequels on Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS, as well as the spin-off series Battalion Wars on GameCube and Wii. It's a colorful strategy series from Intelligent Systems, who have been more than a little busy with the endless amount of Fire Emblem games they've been cranking out over the last decade or so. So what's its health rating? I'm going to go with okay. WayForward did a spectacular job with Advance Wars Reboot Camp on Switch last year, but unfortunately, no one bought it. The game was a victim of some really unfortunate marketing circumstances, which clearly took a huge toll on its sales, which is a bummer because the game is spectacular. With that setback, things could be grim for the franchise, but it's still a bit too early to tell. Maybe Nintendo will give it another go in the near future and see if they can make it stick once again. Next up, we have Alleyway. Back when the Game Boy launched, Tetris and Super Mario Land were the talk of the town, but everybody also seemed to own a copy of Alleyway, a game that was just about as perfectly suited to Nintendo's monochrome handheld as Tetris itself. Alleyway is Nintendo's breakout clone with a touch of Mario charm. It's an extremely common game, and even though it's really simple, it's still incredibly fun to play in short bursts. As for its health rating, I have to declare this one basically dead. I'm reluctant to call anything permanently dead with Nintendo because you really never know with them, but there's been exactly one Alleyway game, and it was released in 1989. Still, Intelligent Systems did a really good job on this one, and it was re-released on the 3DS eShop, so it's not exactly a completely forgotten gem. There's a ton of potential in this kind of game, and seeing what Nintendo could do with it in the modern day would be really fun. Here's hoping it finds its revival someday. Next, let's talk Animal Crossing. Like there's any doubt this game is doing well. In case you've been living under a rock, Animal Crossing is Nintendo's insanely popular life simulation game that everybody played during the pandemic. its health rating is obviously outstanding. Now look, there's an incredibly vocal subsect of players out there who are in a constant state of positively salivating at every opportunity to scream at anyone who is in earshot whenever Animal Crossing New Horizons is mentioned that New Leaf on 3DS was the better game and Nintendo should be ashamed of themselves for the insulting shell of a game that they released on Switch. And if you dare say anything positive about New Horizons, you are a shill, a Nintendrone, and should be cast into the sun to burn in the fieriest of all possible deaths. You know, completely ignoring the improvements that New Horizons made over the previous game, and instead focusing on the handful of things that were a small step back for the franchise. It is a really weird thing to be this hung up on, but outside of those folks, Animal Crossing has been gaining massive amounts of popularity with every entry, with the most recent game selling like, a bajillion copies worldwide. Regardless of some very enthusiastic people out there, Animal Crossing is doing just fine. On the other hand, we have ARMS. This was Nintendo's big new IP push when the Switch launched, and it did pretty well for itself. It's an incredibly creative game with some awesome new characters. There was even a planned comic book adaptation at one point. Its health rating, though, could be better. Even though ARMS sold quite well, a lot of that had to do with the fact that it was an early Switch game. That planned comic book adaptation was cancelled, and when Min Min was announced for Smash Bros., a loud sect of the audience were kinda ticked off about it. It's really hard to tell what Nintendo thinks of this game. They put a lot of effort into promoting it, and they clearly hoped it would be their next Splatoon, but it just never gained the traction that game did. I have hope that we'll see ARMS again in the future because there's a ton of potential in this game's mechanics, but I guess we'll see. Next up, we have Art Academy. Nintendo is no stranger to the art program scene, but Art Academy was the first time they put some effort into actually helping people learn to be better artists, at least in the US. These titles were more like applications than games, and they were an excellent fit for their touchscreen-enabled platforms. Their health rating, though, again could be better. There were a total of 6 games bearing the Art Academy moniker, including 2 that were centered around specific character sets for Pokemon and Disney. DS, 3DS, and Wii U were perfectly suited to the experience, but even though the Switch still has a touchscreen, the series has been silent since 2016. I suspect the lack of a proper stylus for the Switch is the culprit, but that's only a guess. It's not like the Switch is incapable of working with a stylus. It's tough to say for sure, but it's entirely possible we'll see Art Academy again. Now let's talk Astral Chain. This one's a Platinum Games joint, but it's my understanding that Nintendo actually owns the IP. Not the first time something like this has happened, and it certainly won't be the last. It's an action game that involves futuristic police being chained to ghosts that help them fight bad guys, or something like that, I think. It's all kind of bonkers, and I've never actually played the game myself, but it's always looked super cool, so I'm going to give this one a health rating of good. It's still too early to say for sure if this one's going to last. The game just came out in 2019, and it seemed to be pretty well liked and performed admirably, selling well over 1 million copies. But does that mean we'll see it again in the future? It's impossible to say at this point, but I'd be surprised if it stayed quiet forever.
Well, that about wraps it up for numbers and the letter A. There is still a lot of names to get through though. Nintendo's catalog is absolutely insane and filled with quality ideas, and while there's no way they could ever focus on all of them, they could certainly stand to focus on more than they do. Anyway, thanks for watching everyone. If you like what you saw here today, please follow, comment, like, subscribe, share, and let us know what you think of Nintendo's A-list games. Get it? And join us next time for the letter B, where we'll be taking a look at Forgotten Light Gun series, the source of one of the rarest amiibo on Earth, and America's pastime. On behalf of all of us here at Stone Age Gamer, keep playing games.